So thank you all for joining the Community Support Waiver Town Hall meeting. We really appreciate you spending your time with us today. Next slide. So today's speakers, we want to just welcome everyone, and today we are going to talk about some different initiatives that connect with the CSW. We are very excited to discuss these grant initiatives with you today. Today we have Heather Fladmark here to discuss the Kansas Conflict-Free Grant. We have Rachel Wyant here to discuss the New Day Services Transformation Grant. And we have Corey Litweiler here to discuss the 14C to CIE grant. My name is Sarah Lelchuk, and I am the project manager of developing the Community Support Waiver, and I'm very excited to host this webinar today. We also have Michelle Hayden on from KDADS, and she's the LTSS commissioner. Next slide. Our agenda for today. So we started off with the welcome, then we're going to talk about the Conflict-Free Kansas grant. Next will be the New Day grant, and then lastly, we'll talk about the 14C to CIE grant, and then we'll wrap up and talk about some future meetings. Next slide. So PCG is helping KDADS develop the community support waiver as well as implement these and administer these grant initiatives. Public Consulting Group is a public sector consulting firm that works with health, education, and human services agencies. KDADS has contracted with PCG to help administer these different grant initiatives. As part of their roles and responsibilities, they include support developing the grant program and related materials, support reviewing applications, issuing the notification of grant award, and collecting invoices for reimbursement. Thank you. Next slide. Now I'm going to turn it over to Heather to talk about the Conflict-Free Kansas grant.
Thanks, Sari. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Fladmark, and I am the project manager for the Conflict-Free Kansas Grant Program. You can move on to the next slide. Just so that everybody knows before I dive into this detail, this is a high-level overview of the grant programs. And towards the end of the presentation of each grant, we'll talk about future opportunities to hear more about our grants. But starting out with Conflict-Free Kansas grant, this grant is a reimbursement-based grant program that works towards two goals. The first goal is to maximize individuals receiving services, confidence, and trust in their service plans. And the second goal is to ensure providers comply with the federal regulation by helping them mitigate the conflict of interest. These providers are inclusive of the CDDOs, the targeted case management agencies, and the HCBS Intellectual and Developmental Disability Community Service Providers, which I believe we reference as CSPs throughout the rest of this section of slides. We have 5 eligible applicant definitions here and who would be eligible to apply for this grant. I'll quickly run through these 5 eligible applicants definitions, which consists of CDDOs that currently provide HCBS IDD waiver services and propose to use the grant funds to stop providing those IDD waiver services. Second are CDDOs that currently do not provide targeted case management and propose to use the grant funds to start a TCM arm of their agency or acquire a TCM from another agency. The third is HCBS IDD waiver CSPs that currently provide TCM and propose to use the grant funding to stop providing TCM. Fourth is TCM agencies that do not also provide HCBS IDD waiver services that propose to use grant funds to provide TCM services to individuals currently served by an agency with a conflict of interest. And then lastly, it's for individuals or organizations that propose to use grant funds to start a new Kansas targeted case management agency to serve individuals currently served by an agency with a conflict of interest. Next slide, please. Here are some important dates and timelines for the Conflict-Free Kansas grant. Starting out is the posting of the RFA for this grant program. It's March 24th, which is this coming Monday. Our pre-bid conference will be held a few days after on March 27th from 3 to 4 p.m. Central Time. Questions about the grant program are due to us by April 1st. And responses to those questions will be posted before or by April 8th. Application due date is April 28th by 5 p.m. Central. And then we have some anticipated timeframes here. Award letter distribution is anticipated to go out June 3rd, with a grant period starting July 1st, which would have to include signatures of all the documents before that grant period can start for those individuals awarded the grant funding. Lastly, we have the grant period ending December 31st of 2025. And the final reimbursement request date is anticipated to be January 31st of 2026. How this intersects with the CSW is important to call out that the list of eligible grant applicants would also be eligible providers for the CSW. However, providers must be conflict-free in order to serve individuals on the CSW waiver. So these grant funds will help agencies become conflict-free, which would speed up their timeline to becoming a provider of CSW services. Next slide, please. And this is some contact information for the Conflict-Free Kansas grant program, which I can also drop in the chat for everyone for ease of access. But to know more, we do have a website that is titled Conflict-Free Kansas, which has a plethora of information about the reason why this grant program has been established, the federal regulation, and lots of additional information. This website also does have a sign up listserv that you can put in your information to become a part of a mailing list to receive information regarding Conflict-Free Kansas. We also do have a email address that you can email with any questions you may have, along with a phone number as well. The conflict-free, you'll see on the right-hand side, Conflict-Free Kansas Grant Pre-Bid Conference. There is a registration link there where you can register to participate in that upcoming pre-bid conference. Now I will open it up for any questions about Conflict-Free Kansas Grant.
Thank you, Heather. So we don't have any questions as yet. We'll hold just for a second. We did have a question about where people could get some general information about Conflict-Free Kansas, sort of outside the grant program. So we're not going to spend too much time talking on that today, but if you visit conflictfreekansas.com, that's the website Heather just referenced, you can get some information there and also email us any more questions. So I will also add that URL to the chat. But like I said, you can find more information there. And we do, I thought we did, but no, still no questions. So again, we'll hold things just for a couple more moments if you would like to ask your question now. So we do have one person raising their hand. Colleen, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question, you should be able to unmute now.
So I apologize if this was already covered, but so the pre-bid conference next Thursday, the 27th, will that be, can someone explain exactly what's going on at that time?
So that will be sort of a time to do a full run through of the grant. So we have some basic information on the webpage now. And on the 24th, we will post the full request for applications, our FAQ documents, everything else. So that pre-bid conference on the 27th is a chance for us to walk you all through the request for applications, the details of the grant program and the application.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Then for now, in the interest of time, I apologize. We just got another one. A few other ones, okay. This is a question from Ron Fugate. If PCG has done a cost analysis to determine if the grants are adequate to cover the costs of separating TCMs from service providers. So Heather, I think this might be best for you. I know we don't have sort of strictures in place in the grant regarding, individuals can request X, funds for their project. But do we have any sort of like history of what informed the grant program?
Yeah, so we have completed a targeted case management study, which helped inform the development of the grant, along with working together with an advisory group to kind of help us better structure what is, those eligible, ineligible expenses for this grant program. There is no how should I say this? There is no cap essentially on the requests of what you can make for this particular grant. So while you are going through the application process and you've identified those items that you would need assistance for, and have identified that those are eligible items within the grant program, you can request that, and we will then at that time do a review of those requests. So I hope that, Ron, was helpful in your response. There is the overall answer of, was there a cost analysis done? No, we didn't do a cost analysis for the impact to help and assist agencies to move forward with the separation to comply with conflict free.
Thank you, Heather. I'm also seeing a few sort of questions, comments in the chat that we certainly appreciate, but go beyond the sort of scope of the grant program. So I encourage everyone, if you have sort of more general feedback about conflict-free Kansas, please do visit that website. And we encourage you to sign up for the mailing list as well while you're there. But that's your chance to sort of express these larger questions, larger feedback items that we're not really focusing on today. Heather, do you remember offhand what the grant period is? Like how long grantees would have to spend funds?
So the grant period, and if we can go back to the timeline slide, that gives us those dates. So the grant period is anticipated to start July 1, and the grant period ending December 31st of 2025. So it is about that 6-month, 5-6 month time period to spend.
Thank you, Heather. Tom, I believe that answers your question. If not, please just let us know and we'll give more info. And with that, Heather, I will thank you for giving us this overview. As we said, you can register for the pre-bid conference. If you'd like more information on this webinar, or excuse me, this grant specifically, please visit the Conflict Free Kansas website for more information. And with that, we will turn to Rachel, who will cover the New Day grant.
Hello, everyone. Peter, can you confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Rachel.
Great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Wyant, and I am the grant lead for KDAD's New Day Services Transformation Grant. And like Heather, I'm going to provide a high overview about this grant opportunity and also include some future opportunities where everyone can get more information. Next slide, please. This grant is a reimbursement-based grant like Heather's grant. So what that means is that eligible providers must first incur the expense, then they need to pay for it, then they need to submit for reimbursement. So I just want to highlight that out of the gate for everyone that this is a reimbursement-based grant. And the goal of this grant is twofold. One of the goals is to help day service providers adapt their policy to align with the proposed unbundled day service definitions that are targeted to go into effect summer of 2026. These slides provide a link that we will be sharing later as well to the policy, to the proposed unbundled service policy. And within that link, there's also opportunities where stakeholders can go to submit feedback to KDADs, as well as to see future upcoming stakeholder engagement opportunities for stakeholders about the definitions themselves. What our goal is today is to talk about the grant that is helping providers align with this new proposed policy and to plan. So the biggest goal of this is to help providers plan for these upcoming changes. And in a nutshell, what these changes are doing is they're taking the current day service definition and they are taking the components and they are breaking them into 7 individualized, distinct waiver services. So what these individual and distinct waiver services will be, there'll be community day habilitation services, retirement and leisure day habilitation services, pre-vocational services, life skills, career exploration and planning, individual employment support services, and benefit planning. Of note, 3 of those services will be on the CSW waiver. And of those are life skills, career exploration and planning, and individual employment support. Okay. In addition to helping providers plan for this upcoming change, this grant can also help enhance individuals' access to community integrated services and improve their access to competitive employment services. Additionally, it also can help providers gain accreditation, professional development, and training. This grant does have a range of what providers that are eligible, and we'll talk about who that is on the next slide, of what they can request. And so providers can request between $10,000 to $2,000 in grant funds. Next slide, please. Thank you. So to be eligible for this grant, providers need to meet all 7 of these criteria. 1, they have to serve individuals with IDD. 2, they have to serve 25 or more unduplicated individuals receiving home and community-based services. For folks on the line that don't know the term unduplicated, basically that's just our way of saying unique participants. So say you have Betty who comes to your day program 5 days a week. Even though she maybe comes 5 days a week, she's still just one person. So when you're looking at the count, just count people once. So that's what we mean by unduplicated. The third criteria is that you have to be a fully licensed provider. So providers that have a limited license, they're not eligible for this grant. 4 is you have to be in good standing with KDADs, with your managed care organization, and with your CDDO. You also can either not have a corrective action plan, or what most of us call a CAP, or if you do have an active CAP, you have to show us in your application how you're going to use grant funds to mitigate that CAP. And then you also have to make sure that you propose to use services that are in alignment with the unbundled service definitions. It also has to promote community integration, person-centered practices, and it also has to align with the HCBS settings final rule. And if you need a refresher on the HCBS settings final rule, we had included a link there with all of that information. And lastly, the application has to be designed to meet at least one of the grant's objectives to be a valid application. Next slide, please. All right, so this grant is already live. It got posted last Monday. We're really excited about it. We have a pre-bid conference coming up that will be next Monday, March 24th from 10:30 to 11:30 Central. That will be a virtual meeting. In our next slide that we'll have information where you can register. Everyone is welcome to this webinar, even if you are not an eligible provider, just to come and get information. All questions can be submitted up until March 26th, and then we will post the response to the questions that apply to everybody on or before April 2nd. All applications are due April 14th at 5 p.m. We are hoping to get award letters out end of May, and our goal is to start this grant period on July 1st. And then the grant period end date is December 31st, and that final reimbursement request is due January 31st. Next slide, please. All right, so just want to talk about how the New Day grant aligns and how it impacts the CSW waiver. So again, as I mentioned before, 3 of these new individual and distinct waiver services will be on the CSW waiver. And again, those are career exploration and planning, individual employment support services, and life skills support. In addition, providers who meet the criteria for this grant will also be eligible to be providers for the CSW waiver to be able to provide these services. And lastly, I'm just going to highlight this again. This grant helps with training, it helps with accreditation, it helps with other pieces that you can help upskill your workforce. And that is another way that can help providers that will be with the CSW waiver as well. And it helps them provide these services in the new capacity. Next slide, please. All right, we have our website that is live now that includes a lot of information. So it includes a link to the new unbundled service definitions, to this proposed definitions. And again, as I said before, it also directs you to places where you can submit feedback to KDADS directly and to also take part in any upcoming stakeholder feedback opportunities. It also includes the request for application, so the RFA. It includes frequently asked questions and an application guide. It has screenshots of the application, and it also has a draft of the notice of grant agreement, so you can look at that information as well. We're also available for any questions. So if you have any questions specific to your program or questions about the RFA, you can either do that via email at the email address on your screen, or you can also call in. That phone line is answered 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, Central Time. And then again, the pre-bid conference, everyone is welcome to come to that next Monday, the 24th, from 10:30 to 11:30 Central Time. And we have the link where you can register that is also available for everyone. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pause here to see if anybody has any questions for me about the New Day grant.
So we have a couple in the chat right now, Rachel. So a first one about costs. This is from an anonymous attendee asking if the admin costs state that the grant will not cover costs already funded through another source. Does this mean it will not cover the time of current staff to update policies and/or develop and implement trainings? So I'll cover that first half, and then Rachel, I'm going to throw to you. So that part about not already funded through another source, that's mostly to apply to other state funding, other grant programs, things that have given you funding for this same project. Basically, what we're trying to avoid is anyone double dipping, using state funds to cover things they already have funds from elsewhere. Rachel, could you take that second half about whether it would cover the time of current staff to update policies or trainings?
So Forgive me, I don't want to get too specific on what we
Mhm.
can and can't cover today. What I can tell you from experience is when you submit your application, if you're fully able to delineate that this is in addition to any other funding source, that's something we'll look at and really give us a solid application with good explanation. And if you have something more specific on the back end, that's a good time to submit a question via email, and we'll answer as much as we can via email. And we can post some additional guidance as well if you have questions like that to the FAQ, but I'm hesitant to answer anything further today. Next question, please.
Yeah, it's a good point, Rachel. As Rachel said, please do review that RFA and join us for the pre-bid conference, where we can either get a little bit more in-depth or collect these questions for the FAQ document. Another question from an anonymous attendee, just more or less if the legislature has been able to review and sign off on this grant before funds are released. I'm very confident that the legislature is okay with what we're doing. Otherwise, I don't think this grant would exist. But KDADS, this might be a question more for you than for Rachel, just sort of about the legislative process that has led to the New Day grant.
If not, Peter, we can take this one back.
Oh,
Good.
sorry, go ahead. This is Michelle Hayden. I was just going to say the New Day grant, the funds for this have come out of our ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan funds, and those have been approved by CMS that we can use these funds in this way.
Thank you, Michelle. Rachel, this next question is for you. This is mostly about a question about the reimbursement aspect of the grant. So basically, could you just explain, how it works? I'll do a high level, but more or less somebody applies for the grant. They then incur those expenses after they've been awarded a grant, at which point they submit for reimbursement. Is that accurate?
So what will happen is you will apply for the grant, then you will receive a budget. So we will say, okay, let's use the administrative cost as an example. So say you say, I'm going to have to hire a contractor or consultant to help me work through some of my policy. And clearly that's something that hadn't been in your budget before. And then you say, let's keep the math simple. Say we're going to have $2,000 for the consultant to do this. Then what we will do is we will review that. And if we say, yes, that does seem reasonable, you would get a budget for that item, for that category. And then you would incur the expense. So you get the bill from the consulting company. That means you've incurred it. Then you'd pay it. And then you would submit a reimbursement request, which includes a proof of payment. And then we would look at that to make sure, one, it aligns with your approved budget, it aligns within the grant goals, and then you then in turn would get reimbursed.
Rachel, we have another question about sort of other sources of funding. This might be one we take back for the FAQ, Rachel, but would HCBS funding qualify as one of those other sources of funding that we're trying to avoid for double dipping in this case?
Sure, absolutely. So if you are already paid to do a service, say training, like your case managers or your day services providers are paid under HCBS for training, that would be considered double dipping. So you'd need to use that funding first before you'd be eligible to use these grant dollars, these ARPA dollars for, say, training.
A question from Amy about pre-bid conference dates.
Mhm.
So Amy, just to clarify, the New Day grant, the one we're speaking about now, that one is March 24th. Rachel was correct on that. March 27th is the pre-bid conference for the conflict-free Kansas grant. So there are two different grants, so we have those different dates. So again, you'll see all this in the registration links and on the webpage. But just to reiterate, New Day grant, that pre-bid conference is March 24th. Conflict-free Kansas, that one is March 27th. And then a question from Ron, again, sort of similar to the question of the conflict-free Kansas grant, about sort of the cost analysis that went into the production of the grant. Rachel, I don't imagine that there's sort of a short answer we can give to this one. This might be one we want to save for a later date. But Ron, we appreciate the questions we do. We're just trying to, give a brief overview of the grants today, basically to give everybody a chance to decide if they are interested in those later pre-bid conferences. If you'd like to join us for one of those, I think that would be a more appropriate time to get into some of these deeper specifics. Question from an anonymous attendee. Rachel, this one might be most appropriate for you again. So if it goes over, I think the grant budget would be here's the question. I should just read it out. I apologize. So if it goes over the grant budget, will you still reimburse the amount that was originally approved?
So if we're saying consulting fees went up, let's use my example before. So say it was $2,000, you got approved for $2,000. Because of inflation, it went up a little bit. Could you still get that $2,000? Yes, is the short answer to that. As long as it's an approved expense, it was in your approved budget and it went over, then you would have to be responsible, of course, to make that difference up. But as long as, again, we recognize that some of those pieces happen.
Okay. We have 1 minute left. So, Tom, I see your question here in the Q&A. We'll certainly get to that. But because it's about a different grant program, we'll circle back to the end. So just know I do see it and we will get to it. Final call. We can probably get one more question about New Day, if anybody has any others.
And please do email questions as well. We will again update that FAQ and post it to the website if it applies to everyone. So again, just wanted to throw that out again as another avenue after this webinar, in addition to the pre-bid conference, to get your questions answered.
Thank you. And we got a couple more. So the first one is from an anonymous attendee asking if there's any risk of CMS revoking approval for these grants after providers have incurred the costs. So this might be a question again for the FAQ. What I would recommend is read through the RFA and you will see all the sort of, legalese, the ins and outs we have in there regarding what could happen down the line. But this is a good question. I know this is sort of a moment for heightened scrutiny for a lot of providers. So we will save that question. We want to make sure we give you an accurate and, reflective answer. So please do check back in those FAQs, which we will post to the websites, and we'll make sure you get an answer with respect to that. With that said, I think it's time to move on to our next grant. Corey, I believe that's you.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. All right. Hey, all. I'm Corey Litwiller with Public Consulting Group, and I'm heading up the 14C to CIE grant. And I'm excited to tell you all a little bit more about the grant program that actually just launched earlier this week on Monday. So first, we'll get into the overall purpose of the grant. And if we go to the next slide. Perfect. All right. So the overall purpose of the grant is to assist sheltered workshop providers that are currently operating under 14C certificates with paying employees at least the Kansas state minimum wage, which is currently $7.25 per hour. So that's one of the first main focuses and goals of the grant. The second, I would say, overarching purpose is supporting individuals with obtaining and maintaining competitive integrated employment. Now, when we talk about competitive integrated employment, or you'll see it abbreviated as CIE a lot in our grant program materials and RFA, what we mean by CIE is, that employees with disabilities are compensated at or above minimum wage, receiving the same level of benefits as employees without disabilities, working alongside and interacting with employees with or without disabilities, and then finally having opportunities for advancement in their work, again, similar to those other employees without disabilities. So those are the main focus areas and goals of the 14C to CIE grant program. Next, we'll talk a little bit about how the grant program is going to be organized. So this is a two-phase grant. Phase one, which, like I said earlier, this is the phase that opened up earlier this week on Monday, will be focused on minimum wage matching. So this is essentially, for simplicity's sake, I think the best way to think of it is like a dollar for dollar wage match between the grant funds and the provider wage expenses to bring employees up to $7.25 an hour. And so this the application process for phase one that launched largely consists of listing out your current sub-minimum wage employees and their current roles and their respective rates for those roles. Then the application process will help to calculate how much of the gap between an employee's current wage and the state minimum wage, and how much, and then of that gap that's been identified, how much is going to be reimbursed through grant funds versus provider wage expenses. So that's going to be the focus for phase one. Now, phase two is going to be more geared towards focusing on supporting providers with the actual transition away from sheltered workshop activities and towards competitive integrated employment. So the caveat that I'll add here for phase two is that this phase of the grant program would only occur if the grant funding is available. Currently, the state is working to confirm the funding availability for phase two for next fiscal year. But if phase two occurs, it would cover those transition towards CIE activities, such as admin costs for things like policy creation and revision, marketing and communications, staff recruiting and training, and then things like new technology. So over the coming months, we'll be communicating more about phase two. So definitely stay tuned for that. But right now, like I said, that focus is on the phase one minimum wage matching. And with that, we'll get into some of the eligible applicants for 14C. So like I mentioned a couple of times, and especially as it says in the name of the grant, this grant only applies to providers who currently operate under a 14C certificate. So when we launch, which I, as I understand it, is somewhat of a small pool of providers. So when we launched the grant application earlier this week, we worked with the KDETS team to send an email communication to all of the 14C providers. So chances are, if you are a 14C provider, you've already heard from us about the grant program and the application process. All right, so next, I want to cover some key dates for the grant program. A couple I want to highlight here. The first is the pre-bid conference. So this one, similar to the other grant programs, this is where we'll plan to talk through the grant program and the application process in more depth, and certainly answer questions from potential applicants. And this is scheduled for tomorrow, Thursday, March 20th, from 2 to 3 p.m. Central Time. So, like I said, many of or should be all of the 14C providers have already received information on how to register for the tomorrow's pre-bidders conference. Then a couple of key dates that I wanted to mention. The questions from applicants are due by end of day this coming Monday, March 24th, by 5 p.m. And we're expecting to post responses to those questions by the end of next week, March 28th. And then outside of that, where the application window, like I said, it opened on Monday, and it's going to be open for about a month, and the application will close on Monday, April 14th. So it's a pretty simplified application process, all things considered. But certainly do encourage applicants to get into the application sooner rather than later. Give yourself a lay of the land, and certainly enough time to gather any information that you need regarding, current sub-minimum wage employee lists, their roles, wages, all of that good stuff. And then looking out further as we get into like May and June, that's when we'll be sending out award letters and grant agreements with the anticipation of starting the invoicing and grant reimbursement process at the beginning of next fiscal year. All right. So if we could move to the next slide. So how does this grant program tie into the community supports waiver? Well, for one, eligible applicants are eligible providers for the CSW. Again, with the caveat that they are currently operating under a 14C certificate. And then also the focus is for supporting those CSW participants for the items that we mentioned earlier around, receiving at least the state minimum wage, obtaining and maintaining competitive integrated employment. Those are the main focuses for the 14C to CIE grant. All right, so going on to the next slide. If you want to learn more, I do encourage folks to visit the grant webpage, which is linked in the slide here. This is where you can go to register for tomorrow's pre-bidders conference webinar. You can access the application and all of our additional resources there. Certainly, if you have any questions regarding the grant program or the application process, please feel free to reach out to the email or phone number listed on the slide here. I know we went through that quickly, but with that, I'll pause here to see what questions we have.
Thank you, Corey. Appreciate that run through. Excuse me. We do have a few questions. So they're actually all from anonymous attendees, but this first one is about the general phasing. So the anonymous attendee says that their organization generally does better if they have a plan prior to executing it. So the request is if the initial application can be for phase 2, working with KUCD to develop a sound plan before jumping in. So I will say, anonymous attendee, I think there's a bit of a confusion about the breakdown in the phases. So phase 1 is that minimum wage matching. So just sort of getting all your employees up to minimum wage, which I imagine would require some planning, but not as much as that 14C transition. But that first phase also includes working with KUCD to develop a plan. So you will be doing that as part of phase 1. Phase 2 would then involve executing that plan, running through those activities that, again, the grant will provide funding for if such funding is available. So if you apply for the grant and get it, as part of phase 1, you will already be developing that plan. Corey, anything to add there?
No, I think that covers it. And yeah, just one point of clarification. As part of the application process for phase 1, applicants won't be required to submit that transition plan. It will just be a commitment to work with KUCD once you've been approved for phase 1 to work with them to build that transition plan, and that'll be submitted, like Peter said, for consideration for the phase 2 of funding and in transition there. So yeah, just wanted to clarify that piece.
Thank you, Corey. This one I think I'm going to need your help for, Corey. And again, like we said, we might have to take some of these back for the formal FAQ. Will providers who apply for this grant have to abandon their 14C certificate?
Good question. I would say, and certainly anyone from KDADS, feel free to hop in here. But I would say, on the outset, no, that is not a requirement for this grant program. However, given the larger goal of transitioning away from sheltered workshop activities to competitive integrated employment and transitioning away from paying sub minimum wage, I would say the 14C certificate would be irrelevant at that point. And so I would say the long-term goal of the grant program is to move away from the 14C certificates.
And Corey, this next question is sort of related to that. So it's asking if a center could keep center-based work as an option for people who want it, but of course pay them that minimum wage, if in addition to they also support CIE for people who choose that option.
It's a good question. I might punt that to KDADS.
Well, why don't we save that then for the FAQ,
Corey?
That
Sure.
seems something that's appropriate. Again, we have our pre-bid conference tomorrow for anyone who would like to join that. But again, even if we don't cover all these questions there, we will make sure they go into the FAQ and you do get that answer. Sari, this question might be most appropriate for you. This one's sort of related to the CSW more widely. If CSW participants will be able to work in sheltered workshops if they make at least the minimum wage. Now, I'm not sure if this refers to people receiving services or people providing services under the CSW.
Thanks, Peter. I would want clarification if they're receiving services from 14C, then they would be able to, is my understanding. But they'd have to be receiving services.
But could a provider who wants to participate in the CSW operate a sheltered workshop?
That is that's a question I think we'd have to take back, Peter. But we can take it back.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sari. We do have some time still for questions. I know, Tom, yours is still in there, so I will turn to this now. Heather, this gets back to the CFK grant. So this question is going to go all the way back to you. Tom's asking if an organization changes their system as a result of funding under the conflict-free Kansas grant, and then after that funding reverts, after that 6 months, if they then return to their previous service model, so they're one that involved a conflict of interest, sort of, I guess what happens is the question. I imagine this is covered in part in the attestations in the application.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Tom. The intent of the grant is to really support those agencies moving to a full compliance system. And so really once the funding ends, it would be in the interest of the agency to sustain that conflict free environment and not revert back to a conflicted state. And so really the funds is to help agencies get to that point of being able to sustain as a conflict free agency in the state of Kansas. And I'll let, if anyone else on the team has other things that they would like to add, feel free. All right. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you, Heather. I'll say now we do still have some time left for questions. So please do drop any in the Q&A or raise your hand if you have things you'd like to cover. Again, with the caveat that we are trying to focus as much as possible on these grant programs today.
Thanks, Peter. I also just wanted to jump back in for clarification on if a sheltered workshop provider could be a CSW provider. And they would have to be an HCBS provider, so wanted to clarify that. And that they would have to provide services based on the CSW waiver and follow all of the rules for the CSW waiver. We'll give it a few more minutes for questions. So really opening it up to if you have any questions on any of the grants or any other CSW related questions.
We do have, Sari, one person raising their hand. So Leah, I apologize if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but if you'd like to unmute and ask, you should be able to now. Leah, again, you should have the option, or you can always add it to the chat. Okay, I see they have lowered their hand, but if question comes back to you, we're more than happy to answer it. We do have a question from an anonymous attendee, Corey. I think this one's most related to 14C, but I think I can at least start to tackle it. The anonymous attendee is just asking if there are any concerns that participants will lose their jobs if some providers cannot pay the higher wage. Obviously, we don't want anyone to lose their job. That's one reason why we created this grant program, and perhaps going even further back, why the legislature earmarked this money for this transition in the first place. That being said, I mean, it is a priority both in Kansas and in other states to move more to competitive integrated employment. So I think the rationale was this was the best way to sort of facilitate that transition as much as possible. We're trying to do everything we can to support all these providers to ensure that people maintain their employment, but hopefully in a better situation and at a higher wage. Corey, anything to add?
No, I think that's very well said, Peter. Yeah.
Then that is all of our questions in the Q&A and with people raising their hands. So I will just make a last plug for everybody to look at the materials for these 3 grant programs, check out the web pages, read the RFAs, and if you are eligible and interested, sign up for those pre-bid conferences where we can get even more in depth. But with that, I think, Sari, I am handing things back to you.
Thanks, Peter. And next slide. Thank you all for joining today's town hall. Our next town hall is scheduled for Wednesday, April 16th from 2 to 3 p.m. We will see you then. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to email the kansascsw@pcgus.com website. Or if you have any questions specifically regarding the grants, email the grants email address. So thank you all for joining, and we look forward to talking to you next time. Bye. Have a great day.